In order to write Lara Croft nowadays, you must hate Lara Croft. At least that's what Hollywood has a lot of people thinking when the writer comments and says she's trying to make a new Lara Croft for a new generation of big girls and little girls, and nothing in relation to the actual audience that built up this iconic figure. And I think this is what we've been hearing about Lara Croft in all its forms. We have the Phoebe Waller-Bridge version of Lara Croft that was supposed to come out in Amazon, and that was stated to be more for a modern audience take for people that didn't like the original version of Lara Croft from the original trilogy that came out in the 1990s. It seems like this is the sticking point for all creators writing for Lara Croft nowadays. Do not write Lara Croft for the original fan base. Do not write Lara Croft for people that like the original Lara Croft. Make Lara Croft for a new modern audience that may or may not watch this new version of Lara Croft. And I think essentially we've been hearing consistently about this evolution of Lara Croft that needs to be made. And of course, people are going to say Lara Croft has always been this way since 2013, since Underworld, since all these other versions that have this lesbian version of Lara Croft that has this more emotional, more focused on actually preserving legacies and ancient artifacts and giving it back to the communities that have lost these artifacts. And fans of Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are not fans of this conceptualization of this new Lara Croft that is so caring, that is so emotional, that is so uncool and unstylish. You can see this with the response from a lot of the people in the fan base when they're talking about this new version of Lara Croft that we see in the Netflix Tomb Raider version, where it just doesn't feel like the Lara Croft that we all were raised with and played as a video game icon. And I think that's the thing that's angering fans about this new version of Lara Croft, where it just doesn't seem like it's a Lara Croft that we all love. But of course, we knew this was going to happen. We hear this from so many avenues that want to change and reframe and relook at Lara Croft. But hearing it from the writer themselves is always going to be an astonishing thing, because you can tell that the writer absolutely disdains the old version and wants to remake something new into their own vision. And I think that's the thing that we essentially see within Hollywood nowadays when it comes to these iconic female versions of these video game characters, where they're torn down, they're replaced with something new, they're made into a lesbian gay icon when that was never really the fact, and they try to turn it into something that has nothing to do with the original source material. I think that's what we're seeing with the Lara Croft animation, or I would rather say cartoon. It's not really an animation, but this is the situation that we're seeing with Lara Croft, the character, this de-evolution of the character, where it's being stripped away of all the essential forms that we actually like about Lara Croft. We like Lara Croft that didn't care about stealing artifacts from other cultures. But going back to the writer themselves, they say this in an article that was just recently released, where the writer of the cartoon series that's coming out for Netflix talks explicitly about how she hated that men had a perspective and view of Lara Croft from the inception of the character, which is weird because men created the character and championed it for over 15-12 years before it was morphed into this version that has to be made by women now. And I think that is a twisted thing that we're hearing from this person, where it feels like this is their rightful claim, when no, you're not part of the people that created this character. You're more of a person hijacking this character that has disregard for the historical landscape of this character and are there to enforce your own personal values. But continue on, she says, because historically she's been written by men, so she has been this cold figure, and no, she's not like that. So that was the exciting part to see behind the veil and how she is in her everyday life. I'm writing it for little girls as much as I'm writing it for big girls, and this is the focus and intention of this new form of Lara Croft, where it's just not even there for entertainment. Even the previous versions of Lara Croft, even the one that was written for Hollywood for Angelina Jolie, that version of Lara Croft was a version that actually was more appealing and knew and understand that you have to make a character similar and as close as to some of the source material that you do see of the movie. Of course, it didn't do everything exactly correctly, but I think it brought the essence of the character, and that's how you bring about a successful franchise into the popular market. It seems like a lot of the writers, a lot of the producers nowadays are not even focused on making content for people that actually like the property that they're sourcing from. And I think that's essentially that we're seeing now all throughout Hollywood, where no one is interested in actually making something that is consistent with some of the source material. Of course, that seems to be the case, that the past history of Hollywood has always been neglecting some of the source material. But I think when you go down to the bare bones, you got the look and feel of Lara Croft with the character and the actor they chose, and you get the opposite feeling with a lot of the characters that are being chosen for the animation or cartoon, I would like to call it. It's definitely not an animation. And I think that's what we see with Lara Croft, this Netflix version, where it doesn't even feel like the character anymore. It feels like a self-insert from the writer, and that seems to be the case for a lot of Hollywood projects nowadays, where a lot of writers put their own ugly version of themselves into the content that they create, and they create this monstrosity that no one's actually interested in because they themselves are not interesting at all. I think that's what we see here with Lara Croft, where we're getting a self-insert from the writer who's probably a lesbian, who probably has their own relationship problems, who wants to explore it in a Tomb Raider show. And I think we saw this with The Acolyte, where we saw this confused lesbian director in Leslie Headland that created a show about her struggles with her own personal lesbian life and her conflict with her sister. So this is the type of writing we get nowadays. We got this with She-Hulk as well, where we got these self-insert from the writers that are too myopic, too small-minded to make anything that is outside of themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing here with this version of Tomb Raider. We're seeing a small-minded writer that can't go beyond their own scope of interest, trying to make something that is unbelievable, distasteful to the fan base of Tomb Raider. I think that's what we're seeing with the Netflix version of Lara Croft, where we're getting this character that doesn't look like the character anymore. People have this ill-timed frame shot, but I think it just shows the writers themselves are not trying to have that version of Lara Croft that we like anymore. It is the example that we're seeing pop up everywhere, where the writers, the producers, they're trying to make this new version of Lara Croft that nobody wants. And I think essentially that's what we're getting with the Netflix version, and the people responding to it are given the dislikes that it deserves. This is probably going to be a massive failure for Netflix, but Netflix may not care or understand why. They'll just cancel it, and that seems to be Netflix modus operandi. And we saw this happen with Phoebe Waller-Bridge's version of Tomb Raider, where it's being canceled because they may have realized nobody actually wants this. We're making something for an audience that doesn't exist, and I think that's what we're hoping for. Of course, the lesbian scene is probably the thing that pops up the most for most people. I think for me, it's something that they were trying to build towards for the past 10 years with Lara Croft. They want to remove her from the male gaze so much, so hard. The best way to do that is to make her lesbian. We saw inklings and trailings of this where they're trying to force it this way, and it's just sad to see them have their way, especially here with the character right now. And I think that is the essential thing that people are responding to with this cartoon, where it's just making something that is a mockery of what we all once loved, at least what I once loved. But that's just my 2 cents on the situation. You tell me what you think about Lara Croft, the desecration of her corpse that seems to be the case with Netflix, and this cartoon that is being made specifically just for the writer, just like how The Acolyte was made for the producer. And I think that's the situation that we're seeing in Hollywood. Old women trying to make things for themselves that nobody cares to watch. But you tell me what you think about the situation. I'd like to hear your comments. Like, comment, share, subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.